This integrity session is for Spanish 102 online courses. Today we're going to be talking about reflexive verbs. The reflexive verbs that we're going to be discussing are found in the Vista's 3rd edition book, pages 236, 237, etc., lesson 7. The first thing that we need to talk about is how to conjugate a reflexive verb and what a reflexive verb is. A reflexive verb is generally described as any verb that has an SE on the end of the root verb. So, for example, the verb llamarse, se on the end denotes that it's a reflexive verb. Or you have a verb bañarse. The same thing. The se denotes that it's a reflexive verb. Both of these verbs are actually AR verbs because the actual verb form itself ends in an AR. When you conjugate a reflexive verb, or any verb that ends in the SE on the end, when you conjugate one of these verbs, you have to put reflexive pronouns in front of the verb. For example, if you're going to conjugate the verb llamarse, and you've seen this verb conjugated before reflexively, you just didn't know that it was a reflexive verb. If you put it in the yo form, your phrase is going to say yo me llamo. And that says my name is. It literally says I call myself. In the tu form, the tu would be tú te llamas. In the él, ella, or usted form, it's se llama. In the nosotros form, it's nos llamamos. And in the ellos, ellas, or the ustedes form, the pronoun again is se llaman. Technically, what you have here is you have a regular AR verb. It ends in the regular AR endings. O, as, a, amos, an. What you've had to do differently, though, was you've had to come back and you've had to add in these reflexive pronouns in front of the verb. Me, te, se, nos, and se. When you conjugate it. You do not do these with all verbs in Spanish. You only do this with the verbs that end in se. So the verb bañarse, which means to bathe. If you want to say I bathed, it's yo me baño. The tu form is tú te bañas. In the third, él, ella, and usted, it's se baña, etc. The nosotros form, we'll do that one. The nosotros is nosotros nos bañamos. And then we'll do the last one while I've got it up here. Ellos and ustedes is se bañan. On page 237 in your book, you have some reflexive verbs that are also reflexive verbs and they are stem changing verbs. And the stem change is denoted at the end with the parentheses. You have O to UEs, you have E to IE, and you have an E to I. Alright, let's look at one of those. We'll take the verb dormirse. Dormir by itself means to sleep. Dormirse means to fall asleep. Alright, out beside it, it has an O to UE. So not only do you need to remember the reflexive pronouns, you also need to remember the stem change. So the yo form would be yo me duermo. We change that O to EUE. The tu form would be te duermes. The he and she form would be se duerme. The nosotros would be nos dormimos, because there is no stem change in the nosotros form. And then the last one would be se duermen. Alright, another example in the book is the verb vestirse. It means to get dressed. To say I get dressed, you would say me visto, because this verb is an E to I stem change. The tu form would be te vistes. El and ella, usted would be se viste. Nos vestimos, because there's no stem change in the nosotros. And then se visten. And the only thing that I've left off here are the subject pronouns. You can say yo in front of this. You can say tú in front of that if you want to. You can say él, ella, or usted in front of this one. I just left off the subject pronouns for time's sake. Me visto says I get dressed. Te vistes, you get dressed. Se viste could be he or she get dressed, or it could be you formal. Nos vestimos, we get dressed. Se visten could be they get dressed, or it could be you all or y'all get dressed. Alright, let's talk about the differences between a stem changing verb and a non-stem changing verb. Because a number of verbs in Spanish can be reflexive or non-reflexive. Let me give you some examples. What a reflexive verb means is that the action of the verb is reflected back onto the subject of the sentence. So example, we just said me visto. We said that it means I get dressed. Literally, what it is saying is I dress who? I dress myself. Me visto. I get dressed or I dress myself. If just a minute ago we did this one, me llamo, it literally means I call myself. Or if you put it in the he or she form, if you said se llama, that would be he or she calls himself or herself. Now, you cannot make any verb in Spanish reflexive. You can't just pick one and make it reflexive. For example, if you pick the verb beber, beber means to drink. So you couldn't say beberse, because you can't say to drink oneself. Alright, so that one can't be reflexive. But the verb lavar means to wash. Lavarse means to wash oneself, meaning that the action of the verb wash is being done by the subject of the sentence. Like if you say, I wash my hands, she washes her face, they wash their feet, etc. Alright, let me give you an example sentence. If you say, I wash the car, the action of the verb wash goes to the object car, because you're washing the car, you're not washing any part of your own body. So that sentence would just be yo lavo el carro. If you say this, we wash the dog, the action of the verb wash is going to the dog. So that's not going to be reflexive. So that one would be nosotros lavamos el perro. But if you're implying that you're going to wash a part of your own body, that would be reflexive because you're doing the action to yourself. So if you say, I wash my hair, then that sentence would be yo me lavo, because I'm washing my own hair. It would be yo me lavo el pelo. Alright, let's look at another example. We'll use the verb llamarse. The verb llamar means to call. The verb llamarse means to call oneself. Or we also say in English, to be named. Alright, if you make a sentence that says, she calls the police, the action of the verb call is going over here to your direct object police. So it would be ella llama la policía. But if you say she calls herself Ana, or she is named, you can say, it sounds better in English to say that, she is named Ana, that sentence would be ella se llama Ana. Alright, if you take a verb, we'll take the verb despertarse. We'll take that one. Despertarse is an E to IE stem changing verb, and it means to wake up. So if you make a sentence that says, I wake up early, there's no other person mentioned in the sentence, which means that you're waking yourself up literally. Alright? So that would be reflexive. You would say, yo me despierto temprano. But if you say, I wake my son early, I lost my page. There we go. If you say, I wake my son early, the action of the verb wake is going to someone else. So that sentence would be, yo despierto, not reflexive because the action's going to someone else. Yo despierto a mi hijo temprano. So all of the verbs on page 237 that are listed there that have the word say, or the pronoun say attached to the end of the verb, means that when you conjugate it, that you have to put the may, te, say, nos, or say in front of them when you conjugate. You have to have it there. You cannot leave it out. For these verbs on page 237, remember that there are stem changes on page 237, and they'll have them listed out to the side, whether it's an O to UE, an E to IE, or an E to I. Sometimes verbs can be reflexive, or they can be non-reflexive depending on what you're trying to convey. There are verbs like beberse that we just looked at that cannot be reflexive because you can't drink yourself. And then here are some examples in the last pages as well with verbs that change meaning between reflexive and not reflexive. She calls the police because the action goes to the police. It's not reflexive. But if you say she calls herself, meaning the action of the verb is going to her own person, then it has to be reflexive. So you put the reflexive pronoun there. Despertarse, I wake up early. Literally what you're trying to say is that you yourself wake up early. No one else wakes you up, etc. Then that one would be reflexive. But if you say, I wake my son up, the action of the verb is going to someone else. So right here, it's not reflexive. It's just, yo despierto a mi hijo temprano.